Next, All in the Mind reports from the USA on the increase in controversial mental health screening programs for school children. Now, here's Claudia Hammond with All in the Mind.
The biggest screening programme is Teen Screen. It's a quick questionnaire designed for 9 to 18-year-olds, and the idea is to highlight anyone who might have symptoms of a psychiatric problem. But not everyone's happy with the idea. Everyday teenage behaviour might be pathologised as illness, and that the more children who are screened, the more children will end up on psychiatric medication. And some parents are unhappy that their children were given the tests at all. Teresa Rhodes lives in Osceola in the US state of Indiana, and the first she knew of her 15-year-old daughter Chelsea taking part in mental health screening was when she came home very upset. She said a woman at school had told her that she had social anxiety disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder.
She proceeded to explain to my husband and I that they had been taken from their homeroom class and sent down by the teachers, and were then in groups of 10 sent into a classroom and sat down in front of a computer and laid a paper down in front of her and told her to sign this so that she could take the screening. And so she sat down and she took the screening, and she then was directed out into the hallway and told to wait until someone came out and called her name. When the individual came back out of the classroom, she pulled Chelsea aside and told her that she had OCD and social anxiety disorder because you don't go out a lot, and your screening indicates that you like to clean. They told her that her parents could bring her to the Madison Center for treatment. There's a mental health organization here in my district.
And what sort of effect has it had on Chelsea since?
She was quite devastated. The first year or so, she had a lot of self-doubt. She really thought that there was something wrong with her. She truly believed that these were medical professionals and teachers, and she believed what they told her to be the truth.
Now the Rhodes are suing Chelsea's school for failing to obtain written parental permission before she was screened. Their lawyer is John Whitehead from the Rutherford Institute, and he explained why he thinks there's a problem if passive consent is used to obtain permission to screen children.
The fact that they use this so-called passive consent where they say, well, we sent a note home to the parents. When they send notes home in lunch boxes or whatever in kids' pockets, it usually does not get home. So that didn't work, and it's sort of an end run around the law, but it doesn't work. So it's really clear under federal law and state law in the United States that you can't do this. So it does violate both state law and parental rights. This is sort of a leading case. It could go to our U.S. Supreme Court and maybe decide this issue.
And if you win this case, what sort of impact do you think it'll have? I mean, schools are then going to be very nervous about doing this sort of screening at all, aren't they?
I think that'll make them follow the law. I think the schools really need to do their job. They need to be accountable to the parents, and they need to really be careful what they do to children. Chelsea Rhodes went to school one day, a 15-year-old, and thought she was normal, a normal human being. She came home that afternoon thinking she had mental problems. So I think that there's an accountability problem here, and the schools in the United States really need to examine what they're doing.
We did approach Teen Screen, but they chose not to be interviewed nor to give us a statement. The question remains of whether screening can identify teenagers or whether it just leaves young people afraid that there's something very wrong with them just because of the way they answered a few questions. I spoke to Joanna Moncrief, Senior Lecturer in Social and Community Psychiatry at University College London and co-chair of the Critical Psychiatry Network, and to Melvin Otis. He's Assistant Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at the New York University School of Medicine. He began by explaining why he supports mental health screening in schools.
Given the stigma that still surrounds psychiatry, this is one way in which it can be introduced to children.
Joanna, in Chelsea's case, the issue of consent did seem to be a big problem. But if, in principle, if parental consent is obtained, and it's all voluntary, I mean, it sounds like a kind of laudable aim to try and screen individuals.
Well, firstly, on the issue of consent, in order for it to be informed consent, parents really ought to be told that there is no evidence that screening is actually going to prevent suicide, which was one of the main reasons it was introduced, and also that the evidence about standard psychiatric treatments such as drug treatments in children is questionable. For example, the trials on the use of antidepressants in children are inconsistent, and many of them show that antidepressants do not have good effects in children. So parental consent needs to be properly informed consent, and I'm not at all convinced that parents are getting the full facts then when they're being asked about whether to submit their children to this screening programme. I think the problem with screening is that it's already suggesting, way before you get into a clinical interview, that it's already starting to reframe people's problems in medical terms. And so even if the people who do the screening test don't actually say explicitly to the children that they've got a psychiatric disorder called this, the children will take away from the experience of screening that they have a psychiatric problem and that they're psychiatrically ill. And in today's climate, many people will assume that that means that they need drug treatment. One test of the screening instrument that happened in Colorado diagnosed 50% of children as having evidence of possibly having some psychiatric disorder.
50%? That really is quite high, isn't it?
It is indeed, and although not all of those people would probably have a confirmed diagnosis after a clinical interview, you've already started to suggest to them and their families that there's something wrong, and that what is wrong is a medical or psychiatric problem.
So Melvin, what sort of treatments would children then receive?
Well, those options could be, well, you meet with a therapist. That's one way of treatment. Medications are an option.
So Joanna, if it is all voluntary like that and it's all framed in such a way that the children themselves and their parents know exactly what it is that they're filling in and what this test can do and can't do, isn't that reasonable just to sort of highlight things if you can do it in a very sensitive way?
Well, first of all, as you know, it hasn't always been done in a voluntary way. Often the screening has been implemented when parents haven't objected to it, rather than actually parents actively agreeing to their children to be screened. But secondly, I think although many children will attend a clinical interview and won't necessarily go on to be diagnosed and be put on drug treatment, actually even the experience of going to see a psychiatrist may be very frightening and very stigmatising for some people, especially some young people. I think as psychiatrists we get immune to that. We lose sight of how perturbing it is to be told that you might have a psychiatric problem. And of course some children will end up on drug treatment, and we know that more and more children are being put on drug treatment, and I think that there is not enough concern about that at the moment.
Joanna, what do you think will happen here? Will we see this coming across the Atlantic and being introduced in schools in the UK, do you think?
I don't know whether we'll actually get the full screening with use of screening instruments, but we can already see evidence in the UK of the sort of attitudes that have inspired screening in the US. For example, many more childhood behavioural problems are being labelled as psychiatric disorders, are being given diagnostic labels, and the use of a range of psychiatric drugs such as Ritalin and stimulants, antidepressants and antipsychotics, their use is all increasing in line with trends in the United States, albeit not as dramatically.
If screening programmes do start to appear over here, we'll keep you up to date on All in the Mind. But in the meantime, do let us know what you think about the idea of screening teenagers in schools. You can email us at allinthemind@bbc.co.uk.